Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Everything Else Show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. I'm really looking forward to our guest tonight, Brad Steiger, iconic author. And we were just talking ahead of the show how it's taken 2 years to get to this point. So I'm real excited that he's on. And in the spirit of Halloween, we're going to be talking about he has some recently released ebooks, Real Nightmares. I downloaded one from, I think the first one all the way back from, I think it was 2011, and really enjoy reading his work. He has over 2,000 articles, more than 180 titles with inspirational and paranormal themes. He also did some biographies of Greta Garbo, Judy Garland, and one he was really noted for in the beginning, Rudolph Valentino, which later became a film in 1977. I am so glad to have you on. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Oh, my pleasure, Martin. And as I said, and you just mentioned now, 2 years, but people with determination like us, we eventually get it done, right?
That's right, yep. And thank you for staying in touch. That was very nice of you. And I know you went through a move. You've gone through a lot of things, so I really am glad that you reached out again, and here we are. So, in the spirit of Halloween, let's talk about your books, Real Nightmares. I think that's great that you're doing these ebooks. A lot of people, maybe in your generation, would never even think to do that. Was that something that was suggested to you by your publisher, or how did that come about?
Yes, that was my publisher, Roger Janenke, who is a terrific guy to work with. The editor, Kevin Heil, is terrific. And this is kind of a surprise to me, to be frank. All of a sudden, they said, we're having a Christmas treat. We've just put together 4 book selections from other of your books, and we think this is a great idea. And I had done a few for them, must be almost 4 years ago. And the 2 of them, or I don't know, maybe there were 3 or 4 of them, but they sat down and put this together. So this is kind of a surprise. I had to look through and see, now, what did they choose? What did they? And, I think they did a good job. It is a good, what shall we say, sampler to see, what I'm all about and the range of the things. And they wanted to make it, basically the spooky stuff for Halloween. And I think they did a great job on it. So I kind of look at it as a very nice tribute to do that kind of work without my even knowing about it.
Wow,
and
nice.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Just a quick announcement I have to make. I meant to start out with this. Pardon me. And that is in the chat room. I'm not going to be involved in the chat room. I want to concentrate talking to the guests. Toward the end of the show, though, I will announce to the chat room if they have any questions for me for the guests to please go ahead and post them. Also, we can take calls later on if you'd like to call in a question, and I will post that number in the chat room and also announce it as we go along. So, Brad, let's talk about, I know you started all the way back, your first article you wrote, you told me you were a senior in college, 1956, going way back. What sparked your interest in the interesting things you write about, the paranormal, and I see UFOs and aliens and you name it. What inspired you to begin with?
Well, I had no choice. I grew up in a house that had been the former stagecoach stop. And when I was very little, I remember, the creek still running by and so forth, which they eventually tiled it. But it was really, a very picturesque place, and you could just imagine. And the old timers in town would tell me, well, that's where the James boys stopped before they went up to Northfield.
Wow.
pulled the Northfield raid, and they had all kinds of stories. But my sister and I, who are both insomniacs due to the experience, we decided that there were a lot of passengers that must have missed the stage because they're still hanging around in the house.
Ooh.
And it was kind of a nightly, what shall I say, almost like a, cotillion, so to speak, where we'd be lying in bed, and I was in one room, and she was in a corner of my parents' room, and we would see a man and a woman or several men pass through, and it was fine. It was fine, Martin, until they stopped and looked at you. Oh. That was the scary part, because you could get used to it. It's like watching a movie, they go. But when they stop, turn around and stare at you, then you say, "What's going on?" But I grew up then in this with the occasional fearful situation. Once I was alone home, and whatever decided they were really going to give it to me, and I was sitting up in my room reading the latest Western. I was a big Western fanatic when I was a teenager. And all of a sudden, the door opened, slammed, footsteps came upstairs, furniture went flying across the room. I had my dog with me, and Queenie was just going crazy. And she was a wild dog. This was a year where dogs, that terrible dog disease that comes around like every 20 years, had wiped out. And when you're a farmer, you have to have a dog. I mean, it's more important than a hired man. So a trapper told us that he'd seen a wild dog with a puppy, and we actually ran that on foot and got the puppy, and she, of course, at first was just fierce, but then she became fierce member of the family. And she was going crazy, she could see, and I couldn't. And in desperation, I reached my 22 Winchester, and I said, I will shoot if you don't stop. And then I thought, what am I going to shoot? I can't see. All I can see is the effect. And eventually, kind of like they had done enough, and they were laughing, and then they just left. And those kind of situations were repeated to a lesser degree, so I got used to that. So when I grew up and began fascinated with these, trying to explain what did happen, not everyone would accept it. Mm-hmm. Everyone, they might think I was just a imaginative teenager. So I resolved and began writing in the field and studying in the field. And when I first went out, when the word got around that here is this guy writing about ghosts, and word spread, well, we have a ghost, have him come check it out, I had no reluctance to do that, because I was secure in the feeling that ghosts don't hurt you. Ghosts don't really respond. They just scare the hell out of you. Mm-hmm. But in this situation once then, I smart-mouthed to an entity that was trying to lock me in a closet. Jeez. And my friends who were there, my buddy who was with me always was a former Green Beret. And so I said to him, all right, the blankety-blank thing wants the door closed, close it and lock it. Then we went upstairs. This is from a basement where blood would flow from the walls from time to time, and the occupants would see grotesque figures running around. This was really a doozy. But again, I'm doing this confidently. They can't hurt you. Well, I guess I had really ticked it off, because we were no sooner upstairs, and bam, the door ripped off the hinges. It didn't matter to it if it was locked in or not. Ripped off the hinges, and then boom, 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 coming up the stairs like King Kong's coming up. Jeez. and then all 5 of us, or maybe 6, there were some reporters from newspapers who were along watching us investigate this particular house. It had a bit of a reputation. All of us were lifted in the air and then dropped.
Oh, my goodness.
Then I realized I got to do a little revision of my theory, because my theory before, Martin, was that hauntings were residual images somehow impressed in the environment, just as somehow light gets impressed on a camera film. And you can see them, like, especially if you have a certain sensitivity, I suppose. You can see them, but you can't interact with them any more than you can interact with them than the objects on a television set. You're sitting there watching, and you can't say, hey, or I disagree, or you can't reach out and shake hands or whatever. You simply watch. And to me, in the vast majority of cases that we had investigated until that time, they were residual hauntings. They were somehow impressed in the environment by someone's death, by someone's terrible illness and eventual death, or something that left these vibrations, on the entire environment of the house, or particularly perhaps a room where the death took place, or maybe it was a murder. Sometimes it was a murder. But this then was different. Obviously, there was an intelligence. There was an intelligence that could be offended, that could be angered, and that could come after you if you didn't watch out.
Wow. That's an amazing story. Where did you grow up?
I grew up, and not far from where we're living now, in Iowa, and northwestern Iowa. And it was, I wouldn't trade growing up on a farm for any. I've traveled the world now, as they say, and met people from all walks of life, and I cherish the kind of, especially the interaction with the animals, both wild and domesticated, and then again, growing up in this particular environment. Now, it was also fed, of course, and in a new book that I hope we were talking about next Halloween, Martin, that we don't have to wait 2 years to get together, but on ghosts, and the theme of this book on ghosts, that'll be out in July, but gets the big push in Halloween, is what are ghosts really? What are they really? The survival question has to enter in, or maybe not for some people.
You mean a survival of the spirit, you mean, or?
Yeah, right, I'm sorry. You get to use shorthand, when you're in a particular field, Yeah. So the survival of the spirit seems to be the basic, but maybe that's because most of us come from an Abrahamic religion, and we have been taught about the spirit and the ghost within us for years. But I think that is part of it. I've had a near-death experience, so I've seen life from both sides now. Right. And I recognize that are these ghosts, as we want to believe, are surviving relatives and dear ones, or do they assume the guise of our relatives and dear ones? Are they multidimensional beings that are studying us or examining us? There's just an endless number when you really stop to think about it. It's not a simple. And then when you have a vast variety of experiences, which I hope the book will satisfy people in that regard, you see that maybe there isn't a standard that would fit every one of those encounters with a ghost. So that's where I am now, and it's kind of where I am with UFOs. Now, I know you're particularly interested in UFOs, and you said you thought I had touched on it from time to time. Well, I think at last count, I've written 26 books on UFOs.
Oh my goodness!
So,
Yeah, yeah.
so Kevin Randall and I always say, now he'll say, well, Brad wrote more than I did, and then, no, I think Kevin wrote more than I did, and now we got Nick Redfern, coming up, and we think he's trying to catch up to us.
Yeah,
but Nick says, no, I'm not trying to do that.
Yeah, Nick is prolific. He really he
He
writes.
is, yeah.
Yeah, he writes a lot. Wow, interesting. Yeah, one thing about the ghosts, and I know I've never told this story before because this happened to a friend of mine, and this makes me think of a possible residual. Now, I do have a guest coming up this Wednesday who thinks there's a theory of everything, and like you said, possibly like an interdimensional slip or something. But the residual story is what I want to talk about right now, and that is a friend of mine was growing up in upper state New York, and they moved into this old house, and his two brothers and himself were sharing a bedroom. Well, it was late fall, getting cold, and they woke up in the middle of the night to the window being wide open, and one brother blaming the other and all that. So put the window down. It kept happening over and over. So finally, my friend took hammers and a nail and just nailed the window every which way shut. He said, there, okay, you guys, go ahead and lift it now. Well, he got up in the morning, and all the nails were backed out, and the window was up. So
wow.
They talked to some neighbors, and a little boy died in that room of smoke inhalation when the house caught on fire.
Yeah.
So that that's one situation that is pretty spooky and really makes you wonder.
Yeah, those cases, when you receive them from quote unquote ordinary, unpretentious people who may not have told anyone except maybe a few family members until they realize you are interested in the subject and you won't laugh at them, and then you hear some astonishing stories. And some, I might sit back and say, well, I don't say it out loud to them, but I'm saying I think it was probably a mistake of some natural phenomena or whatever. But then others, like the story you're telling, I mean, there just isn't anything that comes around and lifts windows that have been nailed down. That would take a tremendous force.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is a no-nonsense friend. He's an engineer. He does have a sense of humor, but he wasn't. He was very serious about this, and it scared the heck out of him. I have an email that came in when someone saw that you were going to be. I sent out a newsletter saying that you were going to be on tonight. And can I read you this email?
Certainly.
It again in the spirit of Halloween. It's a pretty scary one. I definitely want to hear Brad Steiger's description of real nightmares, because many years ago, a group of 6 to 8 of us, he forgets the exact number, encountered a huge, very frightening, and certainly paranormal something that approached us. And when we were in a very remote location, the thing we all saw was not human, underlined. It wasn't shaped like us at all. It had no legs that they could see, but a torso, shoulders, and a terrifying, very unfriendly looking head. Overall, it was maybe 30 feet tall or taller.
Oh, goodness.
It approached us human walking pace, maybe somewhat faster. It seemed partially self-luminous. Of course, we fled from the thing, but never dared to turn our backs on it. We just fled, running backward as fast as possible, stumbling occasionally, until we reached our cars and got the hell out of there. Mass hallucination, he says in a question mark. I hope that's what it was, but we knew nothing that we could have induced such a totally unexpected, unknown perception in the whole group simultaneously. None of us had been drinking. As a matter of fact, we were all non-drinkers, and not one of us would touch marijuana or LSD. And again, he writes, I hope it was a mass hallucination. It's hard to conceive anything that could have caused us all to hallucinate simultaneously. We have not been thinking about monsters. I don't recall any sound from the thing, but maybe we were just too freaked out to notice. What do you think of that story? Isn't that great?
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Now, I have heard similar descriptions, but 30 feet tall, none that large. I've heard some that were either human size or I call them like walking jelly bags, because they seem almost to be gelatinous in makeup, the way people describe them. Now, he answered the questions I was going to ask. You have to ask them, were you drinking? Were you using weed or whatever? And here it sounds like, a bunch of clean livers. And I would be interested in what they had been talking about.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. What had brought that to manifest. But these kind of stories, they're when you hear them from someone such as this, who sounds like a very down-to-earth, sensible person, you have to wonder, is this, what summoned this? What, now it didn't seem, he didn't mention that it made any direct move to harm them. And it seems not even, is this right, Martin, that it didn't even have appendages like arms and legs?
Yeah, he didn't notice them. I think that's what he says, yeah.
So again, it's the jelly bag story that I get every once in a while. And I remember a very interesting story of, again, I'm of Scandinavian background, Scandinavian American, and that came to me from the old country about two young men, I think it was, who were attacked by these flying. No, again, they weren't flying. They weren't really walking. They were just moving, and they were jelly bags, and that's their only description they could say, because it looked like just some gelatinous things that began to surround them. Now, they had absolute fear because, I've always felt in terms of horror movies. Now, I get much spookier and shivers from Dracula than I do King Kong.
Uh-huh.
I mean, King Kong is so big, I couldn't take him on. I couldn't wrestle him down. But Dracula, if I was prepared and I had my crucifix, I mean, if it's more our size, the fear potion seems to be more intense. That this really could hurt us. When you look at that, you just say, oh boy, now I feel how a mouse feels when a big cat just saw him. So this is a most remarkable story because of the size. I've never heard of one. I say usually they are, let's say, adult male size. No more than maybe 6 or a little over 6 feet, and approaching people. But my goodness, if the jelly bags have grown that big, I can see why people would turn and run in terror.
Yeah, he actually says when it happened was quite a few decades ago, so years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, really interesting. I keep reflecting on what you said about your house growing up. That is, today someone would have one of those, ghost hunters there in 5 minutes. Do you ever keep in touch with the current owners to see if things are still going on there?
That's interesting. Well, okay. Sometimes it's best if you tell the complete story after some bright person like you asks the proper question. The house was torn down when I was a senior in high school. So I got to live in it for only a few months before I went to college. But much of the lumber was still used. I mean, you know, Scandinavians are very frugal people. So much of the lumber was used in building the new house. So it seems whatever spiritual vibration existed in the timber that was made to build the first place was not blunted at all, because it wasn't long. And then I experienced, and my sister experienced them too. We'd be home, and we would hear the door open and close, and our parents would come home. And then we would, go about if we're watching TV or if we're up in our rooms reading or whatever, and we'd hear footsteps. We would hear doors opening and closing, cupboards as perhaps they're getting a little, glass of milk before they went to bed, and then we had a parakeet that would, shout out whenever we came home, hello, hello, hello. The parakeet would grow and everything, so, mom and dad are home. Then we would look out. We had a very long lane. As I said, it had been a stagecoach stop. Very long lane. And we would see headlights coming down the lane. And then within a few moments, our real parents came into the house.
Now, did they ever... pardon me. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. So, again, if this means anything, I did some research, and there is the Scandinavian tradition of the Vardoger, which is the sense of the already seen, or the already heard. So, in other words, this is familiar with people who hear the member of their family coming home before or entering in the house long before the person actually arrives.
Wow. Boy, that brings up all kinds of questions, doesn't it?
It does.
Like time and everything else. Yeah.
Well, it does, because obviously on one level of consciousness, even if it were an unexpected visit from a dear one, that dear one still has a place in your unconscious. You are still, on one level of consciousness, always aware of that being, and that person traveling to your house cannot help but think of when he or she will arrive, what he or she would be talking about with you, etc., etc. So the Vardoger, I found out, has quite a place in the folklore or in the legends of the Scandinavian people. There was one story. I can't think of his name, but he was Scandinavian American living in America, and he wanted to visit the old country, and as many people do, you go back and see your roots and so forth. Mm-hmm. So he walked into this hotel, and right away, everyone greets him by name. Oh. Now, he's never been in there before. Gee. And he says, what? And they say things like, you're back for your yearly summer visit. How nice to see you again. And people all over the hotel and in the village would come up and say, how nice to see you again. So glad you could make it again this summer. And he found out that on one level of being, he had been visiting for, I guess, according to the people of the village, for at least 5 or 6 years. He had appeared in the hotel, rented a room, been walking around. Now, again, this stretches us to think, what are the limits of our unconscious? What are the limits of what we can project? And again, what are our limits, period?
Now, did he try to look up to see if he could see like an old register or anything like that? Do you happen to know that?
Yeah, that was, that's probably, yeah, he had registered every year.
Oh, my goodness. Jeez.
No,
Wow.
no, unless, no, I mean, here again, I mean, you have to go by, just as the letter that you read, you have to go by the individual with whom you meet, who, in that case, we both agreed that person who sent you the letter sounded like a very well-balanced and a very moderate individual who wouldn't overindulge in anything and so forth. So it was the same thing with this gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
His reputation, again, but it's one of those things that, would make a good Twilight Zone story.
Oh, I love that show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a big disappointment of mine, because Rod Sterling and I were going on a dual lecture tour. He would talk about, because he didn't believe in any of this.
Really?
He just thought it made good stories. But he was a total skeptic.
How about that?
So he would present the story, and then I present the quote unquote, the realness of what goes on with a haunting or some of his stories. Mm-hmm. And, that was being arranged, and then he passed away. So
oh, I know. So young.
Yeah.
Wow. That's something else. So your books that you have 4 recently released, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But they're on Kindle only. You can't buy them in the bookstore.
Yeah. I actually like that. And it's instant, quick, and you can get right to it, and it's easy to use the Kindle. So I started reading one of your, like I said, your first book today. But what are the subtitles? I know they're all called Real Nightmares. What are Real Nightmares or Nightmares? What are the
right?
Now, is it just Volume 1, Volume 2, et cetera? Is that how that goes?
Well, actually, Volume 1 goes all the way back, and now we're up to 14, so I don't know how long this will continue. Sherry and I had a role in selecting the first ones, but this was, Happy Halloween, Brad, surprise, surprise.
Yeah. So one of the stories you wrote about HARP, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
And
that
what did you get? Yeah, what did you get? I didn't get a chance to read through that, but what did you get out of researching that?
Well, it was very interesting because some of it is obtainable that they make no secret of.
Pardon me. We should probably tell the listeners what that is to begin with.
Yeah, well, hidden away in the North Country is this, what shall we say, arm of our, I don't want to say it that way, but an experimental group that's doing things with the weather that frighten a lot of us, mm-hmm. because the obvious jump is to be able to create tornadoes, blizzards, hurricanes at will. Now, they claim that they're not doing that, and they wouldn't do that, but they are learning to control weather. Well, then you say, if you can make it do good things, you could also make it do bad things. Right. And that's what is the rub. So with our conspiracy book, where that is taken, we're very proud of that, because even after a second edition and so forth, it just keeps selling and selling. We had an editor who would not allow us the tiniest bit of speculation. Just the facts. Just what can you know, or excuse me, what do you know, and what can you prove that someone said? And it was very difficult working on that, because, look at how often we philosophized or theorized tonight.
Right.
We think of, what this could be and what that could be. But with this, historically, it was just the facts, man. And we're very proud of that now, because, there is nothing wild-eyed and bushy-tailed about the book. This is just, and I think that's why people enjoy it so much and use it as a reference. But with HARP, that's one of those situations, that I see. Well, you can imagine the email I get every day from literally all over the world, and of course, everyone has theories, which is great. I love that. I would be extremely disappointed in my fellow species if everyone sat around and just listened. But something like HARP, I think, should have a more positive, if you will, public relations arm, because this is something that really does strike fear into the hearts of men and women. That because look at this year. I mean, could we imagine? Could we imagine a more destructive year? And then we still have people who don't believe in climate change. Right. And say these things are just happening because, no, the world isn't getting warmer because I went out today and it was pretty chilly. Yeah. Well, you have to look at the at the charts in the graphs for a lot of different places. So many of what's going on now are just game for the type of conspiracies that cause serious-minded people to scoff and laugh at conspiracies, because they just say, "Oh, that's fear and that's fear-mongering and so forth." So, what can I say beyond that? Because there's not a great. We put what we could in their various declarations and acclamations of what they intended to do and what they plan to do with their work. And of course, from their perspective, it's all very benevolent, and we should relax because they're watching the skies for us. Now, on the other hand, and how would I know this? I mean, I'm not all-seeing, but I really felt I see no evidence of any intervention in the horror of the weather that we've had in the last few weeks.
That's a good point.
Where was where was interaction there? Mm-hmm. Where was a screeching halt if they had this power? They surely could not stand by and let various sections of the United States be destroyed and people being killed. So that's right. Again, so many of these things are overstatement, and then they become some paranoid boogeyman, and rightfully so, because we need to know, we need to have as much information about what's going on with these experiments as possible. I mean, we I think we're all tired of learning about experiments, and we have several of them there. The various raids that were done on major American cities, just to test things and to see how people would react. Well, that isn't fair. I mean, we need to know, or be at least warned, we're going to do such and such, and stay inside or look, whatever. So, conspiracies and secret societies, we don't deal with the spooky ones that you read about, and that even though I have the one chapter, of course, you like the UFO research, but you will remember, I am certain, that when what shall we say, the evolution of the alien, I'm sure, Martin, you've noticed how the evolution, if we want to choose to call it that, of first the little green man, now not necessarily green, but that became the expression to kind of summarize or deal with this in kind of a semi-humorous way, because we were frightened. Mm-hmm. Now, I was 11 years old when the big sighting, when we say the UFO age began for us.
47.
And yeah, in 47. And my reaction then was, wow, they're here. They're here. And that was, I think, the way so many young people. I mean, we had read Buck Rogers, and we'd seen all the science fiction stories, those of us who do read or did read, and we were excited. And then, of course, we stretched on, and then the landing, we got to see, what do they look like? What do they look like? And it was decided by the great universal mind or by some very clever manipulators that they would be smaller than we are. And so they were portrayed as little people, but not quite people, big eyes and round skulls, big skulls, because they had more brains than we did to fly all that way. And then it has evolved from that to a wide range of monsters, of godlike beings. And if you've noticed, the first ones had oxygen or whatever they would have. I guess they wouldn't have oxygen masks. They would have whatever they're breathing on.
Yeah.
Right. But they're breathing our atmosphere now. And more we're being told, and I just got a very serious document the other day, how I don't need to worry, because the Pleiades, the Arcturians, they are among us. They've been slowly infiltrating. They look like we do, and they're here to help us. They're here to be our big brother and our big sister. And I immediately repelled at that, because I think as a species, throughout our history, we've had enough big brothers and big sisters making decisions for us and telling us what to do. I like to see the species, as it evolves, becoming more self-confident, more self-reliant, and I think we're on the road to that. But then we have our marvelous technology that came upon the scene, making all kinds of promises, and basically what's achieved is that our population doesn't read anymore. Teenagers don't read anymore. Teenagers have a sense of entitlement, and social media is doing a marvelous job at spreading rumors and division and hatred among us. So I question now this technology that came from, back technology with some of the great discoveries that were allegedly made with crashes and so forth. I think it's time, both in our, and I don't mean to get political now, excuse me, but I'm just going to say, I think it's time, both in our society and in our concept of the universe, of recognizing that we're pretty wonderful. We're pretty marvelous. What have we evolved to become? And we're still evolving. In fact, one of the things that scientists has discovered, we take great credit for all the campaigns that smoking is falling off among many people, and not nearly as many people smoke. And now they have found, and I won't remember the name of the gene, but there is a gene that is evolving in the people being born today that will not desire tobacco, will not desire smoking. And this could, now they project this could involve in the species rejecting fatty foods and, all the things that make us not in the shape that we should be and could be. So we are still evolving if we give us a chance to not become annihilated.
It's true. Evolution takes such a long time, but smoking's
Yes.
been around for a good while. I wonder if we'll evolve where we can hold a smartphone better. Maybe that'll happen. Some type of crook in the arm.
Well, some people are saying,
yeah.
Right, we're evolving where we won't need one. Our psychic powers will be so strong. Well, of course, that's a nice dream, but we know that we have that power now. It's just so few people, if really anyone, can control it 100% of the time. But we all have flashes. We all have things that happen to us daily for many of us, where we say, we've reached out on some level that we can't really explain, and made communication with a dear one, or an event that's going to happened that we foresaw. So but anyone then who claims at this moment in space and time that they can do this 100%, that's where we have the skeptics coming in and saying, parapsychology, psychical research, that's all baloney. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's what makes us truly human, is that level of spirituality, that metaphysical level that we all attain, we can all attain, and we do all attain from time to time in flashes.
That's really great. Well, back to the spirit of Halloween, I want to ask you this question, and that is, what, in all your research and all the stories, everyone has, the painter has his favorite painting. Do you have a favorite story?
You mean of my experience?
That you have written. I'm sorry,
that I've written.
Could have been more specific, yes. One that you researched that just blew you away, that you could tell us about.
Well, I told you about the one where I had to revise my philosophy of ghosts.
Yeah.
That was very interesting.
That is really good. Yeah. Okay. Well, what about?
There are so many, Martin.
I know. I should have warned you about that question ahead of time.
Well, I don't know. It's kind of like people ask me my favorite color, and I don't think I have a favorite color. I just like the whole kaleidoscope of color. But I think of a home, and just kind of, I've seen this now a number of times. So with the poltergeist. Mm-hmm. Now, this was a mansion. I haven't gone to many mansions, but this was an old timber baron's mansion right on the Mississippi. And obviously some foul play had occurred there at one time, and the current residents were seeing what appeared to be a murder that would psychically, mystically, whatever word you want to use, appear on the where it took place in the living room, and they would see it from time to time, and of course, obviously, this would terrify them. So we went to investigate, and I told them, one thing you must do if you have small children is please bring them to a friend, bring them to a neighbor, a relative, or whatever. So I hadn't been in the house long, and I felt the necessity to visit the facilities, and was directed to them. And as I was in there, I hear this little girl chanting and playing and running up and down the hall and laughing. And I thought, come on, I said, we don't want any children in the house while we're investigating. So I confronted the mother, and I said, I did make this request, and she just turned pale. And she says, that's one of the ghosts that runs up and down the hall at night and then comes to my bedside, tugs on my pillow, and says, "Mommy, Mommy."
Wow.
Wow. And then, of course, there was, with the mother, going up to the attic where we could hear threshing and bumping and all kinds of noises that indicated someone or something was up in the attic. And she says, "I will go up there if you go with me." And I said, "Well, of course." So we pause down at the stairs because I can see she's getting cold feet. And she says, "I think I know who's up there." And I says, "You do?" And she says, "Yes, I think it's my father."
Wow.
"Your father in this house?" She says, "Yes, because in his coffin, I could not kiss him. I could not summon the courage I just couldn't kiss him. And and I said, "And you felt guilty ever since?" And she said, yes. That's why I think it's my father." And I said, "Well, let's go see." So we went up, and it was just a cacophony of sound in that attic. Wow. The minute we opened the door, everything stops. Jeez. Everything is quiet. And I walk back and forth, and I feel, but that can be, I'm not immune to a little imagination or feeling myself, but it felt like there were just eyes all around watching us.
Wow. Then
the teenage daughter comes home, and she says, "Oh, no, are you going to get rid of that messy..." And then she had some expletive. And I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, I finally found a way to outwit it." She says, "Before I go to bed at night, it is my custom to lay all the clothes and everything, put all my books in order, so that when I get up, I know exactly what I'm going to wear. I've got my homework ready." So she says, what's been happening is I get up in the morning, my clothes have been scattered all over the room. My homework has been scattered all over the room, and I have to pick everything up before I go to school. And I said, "Oh, that would really get old." And I said, "What have you done to combat it then?" And she laughed. She says, "Before I go to bed at night, I scatter my clothes around the room. I scatter my homework around the room. And when I wake up, everything is in nice order for me to get dressed and go to school."
Isn't that something? Wow.
I've never forgotten that. Yeah. And that was the house, too, where we saw definitely objects, flying toward us. But they didn't, they hit us, but it doesn't hurt. Or at least it didn't hurt us. I wouldn't push it with other poltergeists. But that was really a lively house.
Wow.
And a few years ago, because I had written about this in a book, I got a letter from a woman who said, "What incredible reading." She says, "I was the little girl that you wouldn't let in the house."
Oh, jeez. Isn't that something?
I was the little girl that had to go to the neighbors while you were investigating. She says, "Now I know what went on."
Oh, isn't that funny? Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So what do you think of all the shows on, investigating ghosts? Do you think that any of the people that are doing that are like legitimately are looking and really sincere, or do you think it's mostly theater?
Oh boy. Well, I don't know if I'd even call it theater.
Yeah.
So many people have said to me, "Boy, that's really." When you started writing, there was Hans Holzer, and Ruth Montgomery, and you, and maybe a couple others. And now, of course, look how popular the field is.
Mm-hmm.
And I said it is remarkable because going on a radio show, when I started Martin, there wasn't always a nice Martin on the other end. It was someone who just before we went on air said, "I'm just going to rip you to shreds."
Really?
That kind of friendly greeting. So it was very different. But they say now, look at this, and I said, well, but again, how accurate are these? I mean, one of the things I laugh at, and I just read an article by Alexander Holzer saying, the various machines and again, the voice, recording the electronic voice phenomena. Some of those that are sent to me, all I hear is babble or a little too clear, a little too. And I was laughing with an investigator just the other day, and he was asking me, what do you think of those programs? And I said, I think something just touched me. Because that you're bound to hear in everyone. So I think something scratched me. No, this, and I see something. I know. Oops, something touched my shoulder, and it appears like he said that he and his friends they just sit and laugh at it. Now I don't mean to be cruel, and these people, I don't know how many are sincere. I don't know any of them. I get letters, emails from people. One was a woman last year who said, she says, "What can you do to get me a TV show?" She says, "I've been investigating for 5 years now, and I feel I know enough to really do a good show on television about ghosts." And I said, 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
No, that is a drop in the bucket. And I said, what have you read? What have you studied? Have you read the volumes of some of the masters from the British Society of Psychical Research in the 1800s? Have you read, the lions of our entire field who wrote? And of course, she didn't know any of them, or she didn't know, but she thought she knew enough to have her own television show.
Wow. Now, it's very similar to UFOs. It's fleeting, and when you watch any of these shows, they go in there, one night, and expect something to happen.
Right.
And I think it's I can't even remember the last time I watched one of them, but
nor can I.
Yeah. What do you think the most haunted country is?
Boy, that's a good question. Off the top of one's head, what would you say? You'd say England, right?
Yeah, that's one I would think.
I think it's because with the British Society of Psychical Research, they began taking the field seriously. But people have always, on their level, the folk level, at any rate, taken ghosts, spirits, so forth, seriously. But they actually studied and made it, if not respectable, at least not laughable if you expressed an interest in studying it. Mm-hmm. Now, you can't prevent everyone from being skeptical or laughing at you by any means. But I don't know. I just wrote a blurb, Sherry and I, for our dear friend Brian Allen, who is a British psychical researcher. He's the editor of Phenomena magazine.
Oh, uh-huh.
I hope you've seen that. It's excellent.
Yep.
And he's written a book that he feels will prove survival after death. He's conducted an exhaustive series of experiments with someone he kind of mutually discovered, who seemed to have extraordinary mediumistic abilities. Now, whatever you think, of mediums, you have to say that there is varying degrees of ability. Some are astonishing, some are obviously cold readers. And cold reading is kind of, if you have a flair for the dramatic and so forth, because a couple of times, when someone has said, "Oh, that was such a brilliant, I know that will help me solve my love life," and I said, "Well, can I give you a reading?" And just a cold reading, man, that's even more amazing than the psychic who charged me $50. Because once you learn, the pattern that is used by some professionals, but I'm talking about those who are really sincere, who are, like I did so much work with Irene Hughes, and she was brilliant. I mean, it was just phenomenal, the things that she would pick up and that she would be able to converse and so forth. And there are a number of them that I had the pleasure of working before they went to the big seance room in the sky. Mm. But when you work with that kind of intelligence, the whole idea of respecting, as Brian Allen has done now, he and another, a scientist, and then Brian, who is certainly experienced, years and years of research. And I just saw, a sampling of his book, various chapters and so forth, because it was going to press and they needed something from us soon, enough to get the idea of the book. And it looks really astonishing. So again, that's England. And then Nick Redfern tells me all these stories about England and all the ghosts and our movies, the movies that we've seen, and the both the ghost films and the monster films from England, they're superbly done. Mm-hmm. I mean, when the actor there says, "My God, I think it's a vampire," you really think maybe it is a vampire. It's that whole training they go through, and the whole attitude. I know the acceptance in ghosts, acceptance of the belief in reality of ghosts is equally high. The figures I see, or nearly as high, in the United States, and getting higher all the time. So,
really? You think there's actually more going on now?
Yeah, there's a greater acceptance.
I see what you're saying. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I quoted a couple academic studies where I found this very interesting, and I hope I'm remembering it correctly, is that when you come to college, the skepticism, the so forth, oh, I don't believe in ghosts. Interesting, by the time they graduate, there's a greater acceptance in ghosts, UFOs. Now, again, some of our skeptics would say that makes no sense. It should be in the reverse. They come as college kids and they're freshmen, and that's when they should be saying, "Oh yeah, I believe in that." But it's the reverse, Martin.
Wow.
And you stop and think, I'm sure you can think of some reasons why, as I can. If you're getting a good college education, which is just as much up to you as the college, you've learned to have more of an open mind. You've learned to not reject things out of hand. So I found that very interesting. Couple academic studies that demonstrated that.
Wow, that is.
So I don't know, but then you think of Germany, you think of Holland, you think of Scandinavia. In fact, among the royal family in Norway now, the big thing is ghost hunting.
No.
I quoted it. That was in the New York Times. And I quoted it in the new book that will be coming out in the summer. That's their hobby. Now, once again, just as is happening in Scandinavia, it's happening in the United States. Belief in traditional church dogma is falling, but belief in a greater power in the universe, a power that we can reach out to and touch and receive inspiration, direction, healing, is growing. So it's kind of a true expression of spirituality, but the dogma and sitting in the pews and hearing someone tell you what to believe. I know you've seen the figures too. I assume you have. Organized religion is going way down in numbers, but spirituality is going higher and higher.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, this has been fantastic, and I'm really, really interested in reading your book once you get it published on what you think ghosts really are. That's, to me, I find that fascinating. And you say that would be in July, perhaps?
Right, and it's not just me. I've asked just a whole Academy Award list of researchers, my friends and colleagues, that we've been in the trenches for so long. I'm asking a great group of them to have their opinions as well. So I think it's for someone who's really serious about exploring the unknown, and particularly survival and ghosts, I think it's going to really be a treasure for them.
Excellent. Well, I may connect you to my friend, Paul Eno, that has thoughts on that as well, if that's okay.
Paul is in the book.
Paul is in the book. How about that? Yeah. I should have known better. Yeah. How about that?
Right. It's a small world after all.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Brad. It's been a real pleasure. I really, really enjoyed it, and I hope to have you back on someday.
Well, let's do it. And both of us take a vow now that it won't take 2 years this time.
That's right. All right. And my best to Sherry.
Thank you.
All right.
I'll relay that.
All right. You take care.
You take care as well.
All right.
Good night.
Good night. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. Thanks so much for stopping in. And yes, as I said earlier, I'm not really paying attention to chat. It's just I've noticed that I can just do a little better interaction. And so if you do have questions, I'll be taking questions toward the end of every show, and that includes the podcast UFO show that I'll be back here in studio for on Wednesday. All right, thanks so much. And we'll be back for the Everything Else show in 2 weeks with J.W. Ocker. That's his name. And I'll be talking to you then.